Hi everyone and welcome. I'm so glad you're here for this workshop on styles of spoken poetry. Today we're diving into a few of the most well-known forms of poetry. Old favorites, modern twists, and everything in between. We're exploring the tools poets use to write poems and how you might want to use them too. We'll keep it simple and structured and with a few moments throughout, like that you can jot down lines or just try writing something for yourself. You don't have to write down anything unless you want to, but I will offer a few small prompts along the way. And if something inspires you, feel free to jot down a line or share something in the chat. You will not be asked to share unless you'd like to. No pressure at all. So let's get right into it and begin with one of the most iconic poetry forms out there, which would be the haiku. So, what is a haiku? A haiku is a Japanese form of poetry that's structured but small. Traditionally, it has like 3 lines with a syllable count of 575. It often focuses on nature, seasons, or moments of change, capturing like fleeting small moments, like a snapshot or like a breath. But modern haiku, especially in English, can be more flexible. The spirit matters more than the structure. So, how do you write a haiku? Step one, you have to pick a moment. Using the example on this slide, see, the moment seems to be like a sunrise on the beach. Step two would be using your senses. What do you see, hear, smell, like feel? And like, don't say words like beautiful or peaceful. Say like what makes them feel that way. Like, is it the hush of the leaves? Is it the chill on your sweater? All sorts of things. Step three would be to say it simply. Just use plain language when it comes to haikus. Don't try to sound vague or unsure of what's going on. Just say what happened and what you noticed. Step four would be to structure it with the 575 syllable patterns. Not all haikus do follow this pattern, but for just the simplicity of it, we're going to use this one today. So first line would have 5 syllables, the second would have 7, and the third would have 5 again. To make a strong haiku, you have to focus on having clarity, not clutter. A lot of imagery. You have to paint it, not explain it. Focus and a sense of stillness, surprise, or sudden awareness. Try to avoid emotions like being sad or happy. Like, try and show what caused them. So, I want you guys to maybe try and start writing your own haiku. Think back to a moment from maybe this week, maybe the last, that made you pause, even for half a second, and describe it in just 3 lines. See if you can jot down something, and I will give you guys 5 minutes to see what you can write, and feel free to share it in the chat too. Um, yeah, if anybody has any questions about a syllable is, it's kind of like the beats or chunk of a word. Like cat would have one, apple would have two, because it's like when you're clapping and tapping for each one, that's how many syllables are in a word. So I will give you guys 5 minutes. Just try and brainstorm. See if you can write your own haiku, and you do not have to finish. This is kind of just a brainstorming time. See what you can get done. So that was the 5 minute timer. I hope you guys were able to get something down and exercise your brain muscles a little bit, and write a haiku. But if not, you can absolutely use these skills and just do that later as well. I do have my email on my last slide, so if you'd like to share it with me, I would love to see it. So let's shift now from the quiet simplicity of a haiku to something a little sillier, a little bouncier, like it's called a limerick. You've probably heard this one before, even if you didn't know its name. Limericks are these short, funny poems that tell a tiny story or a joke. They often feel like a little mischievous, and they have a very specific rhythm and rhyme scheme. Here's how a limerick works. It has 5 lines, a rhythm pattern that's called AABBA, and I will go a little bit in depth in that in the next slide. And then another rhythm pattern where lines 1, 2, and 5 are typically longer than 3 and 4. It helps to read one aloud. Here is one I have right here. Is there once was a cat from Peru who dreamt it was dining on stew. It opened one eye, let out a loud cry, my dinner is eating me too. So see how bouncy that feels? The rhythm makes it memorable. The joke at the end is part of what makes a limerick a limerick. They're meant to be playful and surprising. A far cry from haikus. So, how do you write a limerick? Number one, you would start with a character or situation, often something weird or exaggerated. In this case, it's there once was a fly on the wall. Number two, you would set the scene in lines 1 and 2. They should rhyme. In this case, wall and fall both rhyme. Number three, you would be using lines 3 and 4 for like the twist or complication. These are shorter lines, and they still rhyme, but with each other, not with the other two above it. That's why it's called BB. And then lastly, you would finish strong on line 5. Deliver a punchline or wrap it up with a rhyme. This one also rhymes with the first 2 sentences. So take a few minutes to try writing your own limerick. Here's a rhyme bank if you guys need any help with finding good rhyming words that go together. And you can start with something like there once was, or anything silly. And don't worry if it doesn't rhyme perfectly, play around with it. This is a great form to experiment with word sounds and rhymes, as well as different rhythms. If you'd like, feel free to drop it in the chat too. And I can start the timer. I'd love if you guys can just maybe brainstorm, see if you can create your own limerick, or maybe just start one that you can finish later. Here we go. right, so that was the end of the 5 minute timer. I saw some wonderful poems in the chat. I'm so glad that I'm so impressed about these amazing poems. They're really, truly beautiful. And I hope everyone else got a chance to try and start their own limerick, or maybe even finish it. Who knows? So, thank you guys for sharing. I will move on to the very last poetry and the most important one, in my opinion, free verse. Now that we've worked with structural forms like haikus and limericks, let's break the rules a little bit. Free verse poetry doesn't follow a fixed structure. It has no set rhyme, no syllable count, no strict rhythm, but that doesn't mean it's just writing with line breaks. It's still poetry, just poetry that builds its own rhythm, image, and movement. You might recognize free verse from poems like Langston Hughes or Ruby Kaur Ocean Vuong, poets who let emotion or story shape the poem instead of formal rules. Before that, though, let's look at what makes a strong poem. We just looked at and tried haikus and limericks, right? They're super different in tone. Haikus are all about stillness and observation. Limericks are playful and rhythmic, but they both rely on a certain type of structure to work. Haikus use syllable counts and line breaks to create a quiet, reflective mood. Limericks use rhythm, meter, and a very specific rhythmic pattern to develop humor or punchlines. You were already using poetry tools, even if you didn't call them that. So now let's actually name these tools. Because whether you're writing a super structured poem like a sonnet or an unstructured one like free verse, these are the building blocks that give your writing strength, rhythm, and voice. Let's go over a few key terms in our poetry toolbox. Not to memorize them, but just so when you write, you can start noticing what you're doing and choosing as a poet. So, the first thing is meter. Meter is the basic rhythmic pattern of beats in a line of poetry. Meter is what gives some poems a musical bounce, like a heartbeat or a drum, and it's created by the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. In very traditional poetry, like Shakespeare, the meter is often super strict, but even in modern poetry, meter still matters. An example from Shakespeare would be, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" That's called iambic pentameter. 10 syllables, and every other beat is stressed. Next would be rhythm. So, rhythm is a regular, repeated pattern. It's the flow of a poem. It's meant to be driven by meter, repetition, and even punctuation. Think of it like a song, how the beat carries you. Even in free verse, rhythm still matters. It's what helps a poem feel alive when read aloud. So try reading your lines out loud, even if you're not just doing spoken word. Does it move smoothly or trip over itself? Next would be rhyme. Rhyme is the correspondence of sound between words. Rhyme isn't required, especially not in free verse poetry, but it can still give a poem structure, surprise, and musicality. Rhymes can be end rhymes, like at the end of a line, the cat sat on the mat. It could be like internal rhymes, for example, inside of the words, like I went to town to buy a gown. And yeah, you don't need rhyme for a poem to work, but when used well, it can make a line unforgettable. Next is line breaks. So a line break is the point at which text is split into two different lines. This is where poetry separates from prose or just writing. A line break is a very deliberate choice. It controls pacing, rhythm, and emphasis. Breaking a line mid-thought can create tension, and letting a word hang alone can highlight emotion. In free verse, especially in free verse, line breaks are your punctuation. Then stanzas. A stanza is a group of lines forming a unit in a poem. Think of stanzas kind of like paragraphs in poetry. They organize ideas, they images, or rhythms. A stanza break gives space to breathe, to shift, or to make something land. You might see two-line stanzas, four-line stanzas, or poems with no stanzas at all. The format you choose affects how a reader experiences the piece. And then, lastly, verse. Verse is writing arranged with a metrical rhythm. Sometimes verse also just means poetry in general, but more specifically, it refers to poetic writing with meter and structure. Blank verse is a poetry with meter but no rhyme. And free verse is poetry with no set meter or rhyme. You'll hear this word used quite a bit, and it helps to know it's usually a way of saying structured poetry, as opposed to prose or just narrative story writing. So let's pause for a second and go back to free verse. We just explored the poetic toolbox: rhyme, rhythm, line breaks, meter, stanzas, all sorts of things, verses. And in our haikus and limericks earlier, you saw how those tools can be used with a lot of structure. They give the poem shape. Boundaries, a kind of musical like scaffolding. But what if your poem doesn't want scaffolding? What if you have something to say, something emotional or messy or just honest? And what if it just doesn't come out in perfect little beats? What if it doesn't rhyme? What if it doesn't even look like what you think a poem looks like? And that brings us for the main idea of today. What is free verse? If it doesn't rhyme, and if it doesn't follow any rules, how is it still a poem? That's the big question. Free verse poems throw out a lot of the traditional rulebook, but they don't throw out intention. In fact, free verse requires just as much thought. The poet is still making choices, and those choices give the poem shape, even when it looks loose or casual. Then you can dive into other things like repetition or vivid imagery. There are some traits that often define free verse, like intentional line breaks. The poet is choosing where to end each line, often for emphasis, pacing, or surprise. Like I said, repetition, a phrase or image might echo throughout to give the poem structure. And vivid imagery. Free verse leans hard into the visual or emotional side of things. Free verse is like choreography. Even if you're not dancing to a beat, you're still moving with purpose. And there's no one right way to write free verse poems. But here's a simple starting approach. Start with a moment. Say something true, something you felt, something you want to say. And then just write a stream. Don't worry about punctuation or rhyme yet, just flow. Go back and then break the lines. Ask yourself, where do I want the reader to pause? What words do I want to stand alone? What's most important to me? And then lastly, just ramble. Free verse poetry is almost like a flow of your thoughts. So just let yourself write whatever is going on in your head. Here are some examples, just to show you kind of how free verse poems look. These ones do have generally shorter lines, but see how they don't rhyme, but instead show poetry by fancy word like but instead show poetry by fancy words and like descriptive language. And if it's hard for you to do in English, try doing it in another language. Poetry is universal, and free verse especially is found all over the world. The most important thing is to express what feels true to you, whatever helps you feel confident. And lastly, now it is your turn. So, our third and final poem of today. I'd like you guys to spend about 5 minutes writing your own free verse poem. Think about a moment or feeling you want to share. Use line breaks however they feel right to you. And don't worry about rhyme or rules, just let your thoughts flow. If you want, you can share your poem or a few lines either here in the chat or privately with me. And if you want to revisit this session later, my YouTube channel will have a link to this, and I will post the recording there so you can come back anytime. And since I think we're almost nearing the end of our time here, I will also share my website and social medias if you haven't seen them already. I will leave this slide up while you guys work on your favors. Feel free to take a photo, write it down. I can send it in the chat as well. I'm so sorry to interrupt you guys, but unfortunately, our meeting time is coming to an end. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me today. We've explored some different types of poetries, haikus, limericks, and especially free verse, what it is, how it works, and how you can make it your own. So just remember that poetry doesn't have to follow strict rules to be powerful. It's about expressing yourself honestly and using tools that feel right for your voice. Keep writing, keep experimenting with line breaks, rhythm, and vivid images. And most importantly, write with your heart. If you'd like to share any poems with me, I would absolutely love to feature them on my website, and I have a page for that. I'm always excited to see what you guys come up with next. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want feedback on something. I am always happy to help. Thank you all again for coming, and I hope you keep enjoying poetry in all its wonderful forms. Yeah, if you'd like to spend some more time just working on your free verse poem and sharing it, you totally can. But we unfortunately only have 2 more minutes until this ends.